In 2021, over 800 million people around the world were living with gastroesophageal reflux disease. That burning sensation behind the breastbone, the sour taste climbing the back of the throat, the nights spent propped up on pillows because lying flat turns the chest into a furnace. For roughly 1 in 5 North Americans, these symptoms arrive at least once a week, turning the bedroom into a nightly negotiation with gravity and stomach acid. GERD prescriptions fill medicine cabinets from Portland to Pittsburgh, and the drugs used to treat it belong to a pharmaceutical market worth over $3 billion a year. But if you had walked into a family doctor's office in 1953 and described those exact symptoms, you probably would have gotten little more than a puzzled look and a suggestion to eat less pepper. So what changed between a kitchen in suburban Ohio in 1955 and the drive-through lane of a fast food restaurant today? The answer is not one thing. It is almost everything. It was the middle of the 20th century, and the American kitchen looked nothing like it does today. Meals were cooked from scratch on a simple stovetop. A roast went into the oven on Sunday morning before church. Leftovers from that roast showed up again on Monday, sliced between 2 pieces of bread for lunch. Meals were built around a simple principle that most mid-century cookbooks repeated almost word for word: a portion of protein, a cooked vegetable, a starch, and something fresh on the side. Breakfast meant eggs, bacon, and toast. Dinner arrived on the table between 5 and 6 in the evening, served on plates that were, by modern standards, surprisingly small. If you have ever walked through an antique shop and picked up a dinner plate from that era, you have noticed the evidence yourself. Plates from the 1950s are noticeably smaller than anything on store shelves today. Coffee cups held about 6 ounces. The smallest size at a major coffee chain today holds 12. The food on those plates was different too, not because families in 1955 were health conscious in the way we understand the term now. They ate plenty of saturated fat. Cooking grease was saved and reused as a regular part of home cooking. Butter went on everything from morning toast to evening vegetables. The difference between then and now was not in what families chose to avoid. It was in what did not yet exist. Ultra-processed snack foods, fast food on every corner, oversized soft drinks, none of that had arrived yet. And this is where the numbers tell a story that is hard to believe. A soda in the 1950s came in a small glass bottle, about 7 ounces. Today, a typical convenience store drink runs 30 ounces or more, and some oversized cups hold 64 ounces of sugar water. How did portions grow that dramatically in barely 2 generations? The answer has everything to do with economics and marketing, and very little to do with thirst. The original serving of fries at a fast food restaurant in the mid-50s weighed about 2.5 ounces. That portion still exists on the menu today, labeled small, weighing 1/3 of the current largest size. Portion sizes began creeping upward in the 1970s, rose sharply through the 80s, and kept climbing in lockstep with American body weights. By the late 20th century, foods like French fries, hamburgers, and soda had swelled to 2 to 5 times their original sizes. The average restaurant meal today is more than 4 times larger than it was 70 years ago. But the size of the plate is only half the story. What that oversized meal does after it enters the body is the part that explains the acid reflux epidemic. When someone eats a large meal, the stomach stretches to accommodate the volume. That stretching increases pressure inside the abdomen. The organ most affected by that pressure is the lower esophageal sphincter, a ring of muscle sitting at the junction between the esophagus and the stomach. Under normal conditions, this sphincter stays closed after food passes through, keeping hydrochloric acid where it belongs. But when intra-abdominal pressure rises, whether from an oversized meal, tight clothing around the waist, or excess body fat pressing against the stomach wall, that sphincter can relax or open slightly. And when it does, acid escapes upward into the esophagus, producing that familiar burn that sends millions of people to the pharmacy every year. But here is the part that makes this whole story so striking. Could our grandparents have avoided this problem without even knowing the mechanism existed? The evidence strongly suggests they did, and the reason connects directly to weight. In the early 1960s, roughly 13% of American adults qualified as obese by clinical standards. That number was already considered alarming enough that Life magazine ran a major feature in 1954 calling obesity a national plague, estimating that 5 million Americans were medically obese. But compared to what followed over the next half-century, those figures look quaint. By the late 2010s, the obesity rate had climbed past 40% of the adult population. Adults today are, on average, 26 pounds heavier than they were 7 decades ago. The trend is not confined to any single group. It cuts across income levels, racial backgrounds, and education levels with striking consistency. What does a 26-pound weight difference actually mean for the digestive system? Think about it for a moment. Much of that additional weight collects around the midsection, surrounding the organs of the upper abdomen. Every pound of abdominal fat creates upward pressure against the stomach. The stomach gets compressed from the outside, and the contents have to go somewhere. In the body, what escapes is stomach acid, forced upward through the lower esophageal sphincter into the esophagus. Researchers have confirmed this connection with hard data. A meta-analysis published in the Annals of Internal Medicine found that obesity is associated with a statistically significant increase in reflux symptoms, and that risk rises progressively with each additional pound around the waist. Waist circumference turned out to be an even stronger predictor than overall body weight, suggesting that it is specifically abdominal fat, not weight distributed across the body, that drives reflux. The post-war suburban lifestyle accelerated this shift in ways no one anticipated at the time. Automobiles replaced walking, desk jobs replaced physical labor, and television replaced the evening strolls that had kept people moving after dinner. Each change was individually small, but together they restructured daily life around sitting. But weight alone does not explain the full picture. What shifted in the American relationship with food went beyond quantity. It reshaped when and how people ate. There is a detail about mid-century family life that rarely gets mentioned in health discussions, and it may be one of the most important factors of all. Dinner was not eaten in front of a television screen. It was not consumed on a couch while scrolling through a phone. Families sat down at a table, served food onto those smaller plates, and ate together at a predictable hour. The meal started, it ended, and the kitchen closed for the night. There was no pantry full of shelf-stable snacks calling from across the hallway at 11:30. Why does that timing matter so much for acid reflux specifically? Modern research in chrononutrition, the study of how meal timing interacts with the body's circadian clock, has shown that eating within 2 to 3 hours of sleep is associated with worse blood sugar regulation, disrupted digestion, and a significantly higher risk of reflux. When you eat late and lie down shortly after, gravity is no longer helping keep stomach contents in place. The sphincter at the top of the stomach has to do all the work on its own, and if it is already weakened by abdominal pressure or stress hormones, the result is predictable. A study using smartphone tracking found that for many Americans today, the traditional 3 square meals have been replaced by a pattern of late morning snacking, mid-afternoon grazing, and late-night eating that stretches the feeding window well past 10 at night. Researchers at the Salk Institute who analyzed modern eating patterns concluded that not only are Americans consuming excess calories, they are consuming them later in the day. People in that era did not sit up until 1 in the morning eating leftover pizza. The evening meal landed between 5 and 6. Bedtime arrived by 10 or 10:30. That gap between the last bite of food and the moment a person lay down horizontally, 4 to 5 hours minimum. Think about what that means for the esophageal sphincter. 4 to 5 hours of upright, active digestion before gravity stopped helping. There is also the question of how people ate, not merely when. Mid-century meals were sit-down events. Food was portioned onto plates in the kitchen or served from shared dishes at the center of the table. You ate what was in front of you, and there was a natural stopping point built into the ritual. Compare that to the modern pattern of continuous access, where snacks are always within reach at work, and food delivery services bring meals to your door at any hour. The very concept of a defined mealtime with a clear beginning and end has eroded, and with it, the body's ability to complete one digestive cycle before the next begins. Today, with eating pushed later and the distinction between meals and snacks blurred beyond recognition, the window for upright digestion has shrunk dramatically, and that muscular valve at the base of the esophagus bears the consequences. But this story involves more than bare food and timing. While all of this was unfolding at the dinner table and in the pantry, something else was shifting in a place far less visible: the nervous system. When the body perceives a threat, real or imagined, the brain activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This system releases cortisol and adrenaline, hormones designed to help a person fight or run. Blood flow diverts away from the digestive organs and toward the muscles and heart. The stomach slows its emptying process. Acid production can spike, and the lower esophageal sphincter, that same muscle ring responsible for keeping acid out of the esophagus, weakens under the influence of these stress hormones. A comprehensive review of the gut-brain axis S and its relationship to reflux found that elevated cortisol from chronic stress increases intestinal permeability, disrupts the esophageal barrier, and impairs the vagus nerve, which carries 80% of the signals traveling between the gut and the brain. In studies using validated psychological instruments, patients with laryngopharyngeal reflux consistently scored higher on stress and anxiety scales than healthy control subjects. If you are finding this useful, take a moment to subscribe. We cover forgotten health history like this every week. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains a great deal about why reflux has become so widespread. Chronic stress does not produce a single dramatic digestive event. It creates a low-grade, ongoing disruption that, compounded over months and years, makes acid reflux almost a biological certainty for vulnerable individuals. Your gut does not distinguish between a physical threat and a stressful notification on your phone late at night. The hormonal cascade is identical, and suppression of digestive function follows the very path it evolved to follow. That sphincter muscle weakens either way. Only the duration differs. A physical danger passes in minutes, but modern stress rarely resolves. And here is the detail that connects all of this back to the mid-20th century. The lifestyle patterns of the mid-20th century, for all their limitations and genuine inequities, were structured in ways that naturally limited the kind of stress that damages digestion. Meals arrived at a consistent hour each day, giving the gut a predictable rhythm. Physical activity was woven into daily routines rather than something scheduled at a gym 3 times a week. People walked to nearby shops, did yard work by hand, hung laundry outside, and took the stairs because their daily routines simply required more movement. Evening hours were quieter. There was no 24-hour news cycle broadcasting anxiety into the living room. No email arriving at midnight demanding a response. No social media feeds triggering low-grade cortisol spikes at 2 in the morning. This does not mean the mid-20th century was a stress-free era. They were not. Racial segregation, Cold War nuclear anxiety, rigid gender expectations, and economic hardship affected millions of Americans in ways that were profoundly damaging. But the specific type of chronic, fragmented, always-on stress that characterizes modern life, the kind that keeps cortisol simmering for hours without resolution, was far less common, and that difference shows up directly in the digestive tract. But this story was not only about stress and sleep schedules. There is also the question of what was actually in the food itself, and how dramatically the composition of the American food supply changed between the mid-20th century and today. In 1955, a typical grocery store carried around 600 items. Today, the average American supermarket stocks over 30,000 products, and the overwhelming majority fall into a category researchers call ultra-processed foods. These are products manufactured through multiple industrial steps, containing emulsifiers, stabilizers, flavor enhancers, and other ingredients rarely found in a home kitchen, all engineered for extended shelf life and maximum palatability. Studies have linked ultra-processed food consumption to obesity, chronic inflammation, and disrupted gut bacteria, each of which is an independent risk factor for acid reflux. Many of these additives can also directly irritate the esophageal lining or relax the valve between the stomach and esophagus, compounding the problem from multiple directions simultaneously. The rise of these products did not happen by accident. After the Second World War, food technology accelerated rapidly. Preservation methods refined for military use entered the consumer market. Convenience became the primary marketing appeal, and it worked. Women entering the workforce in growing numbers needed faster meal solutions. Suburban families embraced packaged and ready-made foods. By the 1970s and 80s, the share of daily calories Americans consumed from ultra-processed sources had climbed steadily, and it has continued rising ever since. But something paradoxical unfolded alongside that dietary shift. As the food supply changed in ways that made reflux more likely, the pharmaceutical industry developed increasingly sophisticated drugs to treat the symptoms those changes produced. Before the 1980s, people with occasional heartburn reached for simple over-the-counter antacids. The first proton pump inhibitor, omeprazole, reached the market in the late 1980s and changed digestive medicine entirely. These drugs suppress stomach acid production at its source by blocking the enzyme responsible for secreting acid into the stomach lining. They worked so effectively that they became one of the most widely prescribed drug classes in the world and eventually moved from prescription-only status to over-the-counter availability in many countries. More than 60 million Americans now experience acid indigestion at least once a month, and the global proton pump inhibitor market has reached a value measured in billions. What had previously been a relatively uncommon medical complaint became so widespread that drugstore aisles now dedicate entire sections to acid reflux remedies. And rather than asking why that number keeps climbing, the default medical response for many patients became a recurring prescription. This is not a criticism of anyone who takes reflux medication. For people with erosive esophagitis, Barrett's esophagus, or other serious complications, these drugs can be necessary and even life-saving. But the sheer scale of their use raises a question worth sitting with. Are we treating a disease, or are we treating the downstream consequences of how an entire society eats, moves, sleeps, and manages stress? When you line up the evidence side by side, the picture is difficult to dismiss. In the 1950s, portions were smaller and served on smaller plates. Meals were structured around a predictable schedule and finished early in the evening, leaving hours for digestion before bed. Physical activity was a natural byproduct of daily chores and transportation, not something requiring a gym membership. Ultra-processed foods represented a tiny fraction of the diet. chronic fragmented stress from digital technology and constant connectivity did not exist, and obesity rates sat at roughly 1/3 of where they stand today. None of those individual factors caused acid reflux on its own. A large meal at 5:30 in the evening, eaten at a table and followed by 4 hours of upright activity before bed, probably does very little harm. A late meal eaten quickly on a couch, followed by immediate sleep, does considerably more. Add chronic stress, 30 extra pounds of abdominal weight, and a diet built around ultra-processed ingredients, and the lower esophageal sphincter is under siege from every direction at once. What made the 1950s different was not any single health-conscious decision. It was the structure itself. The rhythm of cooking, eating at a set time, cleaning up and closing the kitchen created a digestive environment that happened to protect a muscle nobody in that era could have named. The protection was not deliberate. It was built into the architecture of daily life. Today, that architecture has largely dissolved. Meals are portable, eaten at desks, in cars, on couches, and at unpredictable hours. Snacking fills every gap between meals and often extends past midnight. Physical activity requires deliberate scheduling rather than occurring naturally through chores and transportation. And chronic, low-resolution stress from screens, notifications, and information overload bathes the nervous system in cortisol for hours at a stretch. So what did society build in place of that vanished rhythm? Not prevention, treatment. The proton pump inhibitor market alone is projected to reach over $5 billion by the mid-2030s, a figure that reflects less about medical progress and more about the scale of a problem that did not need to become this widespread. Global gastroesophageal reflux disease cases are expected to keep climbing, with the sharpest increases now appearing among younger adults between 25 and 34, a demographic that was rarely diagnosed with the condition 2 generations ago. Reflux is getting younger at the same time the food supply is getting more processed and the population is getting heavier. In 1955, the kitchen did not have the answers to everything. That era had genuine blind spots about nutrition, equity, and public health that deserve honest acknowledgement rather than romantic revision. But it had answers to this particular problem, answers hiding in plain sight inside the rhythm of a family dinner served at 5:30 on plates that look almost miniature by today's standards. And perhaps the most useful thing we can carry forward is not a recipe for pot roast or a wave of sepia-toned nostalgia, but a recognition that the human digestive system was built for a pattern of eating, moving, and resting that we have quietly abandoned without noticing what we lost. The real question is not whether acid reflux existed in the 1950s. It did in small numbers. The question is whether we are willing to rebuild even a fraction of the rhythm that kept it rare. Number 17, meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. If this changed how you think about what is on your plate and when it gets there, you will want to see what we cover next. We explore the forgotten health habits of past generations every week, and the next video is already on screen.